You're listening to Marks of a Healthy Church, a Sunday school series taught by the elders and deacons of Maple City Baptist Church in Chatham, Ontario. For more information about Maple City, please visit us online at maplecitybaptistchurch.com.
All right, so we're going to continue our series in the subject of prayer again, and this will be our second last week speaking about the subject of prayer, and then I think 2 weeks from now we're having a new attendees / new members kind of get together in here so we can let them get to know our church a little bit more. And then Brother Andrew will start a series on a book of the Bible. He's narrowed it down to 2 possible books. The book of...
Old Testament, New Testament.
Yep. Colossians or Philippians. So you'll find out what he's chosen once we get there in a couple weeks. But prayer is the subject we're addressing again today, and so we've been beginning our lessons with quotes from different guys and ladies from the past, and I won't go through the list again, but I wanted to kind of hit 2. Since we're getting toward the end, I'm realizing that I won't be able to use every person that I wanted to use, the greatest quotes, and so I thought I'd do 2 for 1 today. And so you'll get a quote from J.C. Ryle and Martin Lloyd-Jones, but I think they go together. And so J.C. Ryle wrote a book called Practical Religion, and he had a chapter entitled Prayer. And so this book is about how to live out the Christian life. And on his subject of prayer, he asserts that prayer is the most important subject in practical religion. So he writes a book that tells you how to live out the Christian life, and he begins the chapter on prayer saying, this is the most important thing. Now, I'm not sure I 100% agree with him. I think that there's a lot of disciplines that are essential for the Christian life, but it's interesting to me that a guy like J.C. Ryle would write a book on living out your faith and say prayer is the most important thing. He gave 7 reasons for that. And so I'll give them to you. He said, first of all, prayer is absolutely needful to a man's salvation. Can't be saved unless you pray. A habit of prayer is one of the surest marks of a true Christian. So once you are saved, one of the surest marks of a true Christian is that you pray regularly. Number 3, there is no duty in religion that is so neglected as private prayer. So because it's so neglected and it's so important that it is considered now the most important, so we can get emphasis there. Number 4, prayer is the act of religion to which there is greatest encouragement. You'll be encouraged when you pray. Number 5, diligence in prayer is the secret of eminent holiness. And I think this is something that we've been hearing in the growth group series, but we need to hear often, that you can't just make yourself holy. You don't have the power to do that all by yourself. If we are ever going to grow in our holiness, if we're going to become more like Christ, that is going to be something we need to go to God for and ask for His power, because it has to be His power working in us. It won't be our power. And so if you struggle with an area, be on your knees often about that. Okay, pray. Number 6, neglect of prayer is one great cause of backsliding. And it goes along with the same idea. And number 7, prayer is one of the best recipes for happiness and contentment. So if you struggle with your happiness and contentment, maybe you should pray more. So that's what J.C. Ryle says. Here's what Martin Lloyd-Jones says, and he says something kind of similar, but his is in paragraph form. He says, prayer is beyond any question the highest activity of the human soul. Man is at his greatest and his highest when, upon his knees, he comes face to face with God. When a man is authentically speaking to God, he is at his very acme. It is the highest activity of the human soul, and therefore it is at the same time the ultimate test of a man's true spiritual condition. There is nothing that tells the truth about us as Christian people so much as our prayer life. Everything we do in the Christian life is easier than prayer. Even our concern for the salvation of souls, even our concern for God's blessing upon the preaching of the word, even our concern for those who are near and dear to us that they may become truly Christian, even these things must never be given the first place, the first position in our praying. Still, Less must we ever start with our own circumstances and conditions. Before we begin to think of ourselves and our own needs, even before our concern for others, we must start with this great concern about God and His honor and His glory. There is no principle in connection with the Christian life that exceeds this in importance. So he says prayer is the most important thing. He's on the same line as J.C. Ryle, but he says it's not just about you pray so you can get what you want. You pray to go to God so that He'll give you your needs. You pray because it's about His honor and His glory. And so if we would have prayer lives that were regular and centered around that idea, the glory of God, that began with praise and adoration and the desire for God's will in our life, that would transform us. It really, really would. So we've been looking at the practice of the early church through the book of Acts, how they prayed, and I think we saw that prayer is vital in the life of the early church. It was the source of their power, their strength, their courage, and their boldness. It was what allowed them to go out and share the gospel with others, and it's what allowed those outings to be successful. And so I think it's helpful for us to see what a healthy prayer-like life looks like in the church, and we clearly see that in the book of Acts. They have a healthy prayer life. They're constantly going to prayer. We want to be like them, where we go to God in times of crisis, in times when we're fearful, in times when we have decisions to be made, in times when we're glad or sad. And we should go to God when we are hopeless. But I think what struck me as we look at all of these things is that, yes, they go to God when they have these extreme emotions or serious needs, but it just seemed like the story of the early church is that they went to God all the time. So they went to God when they were hopeless and when they were in crisis and then when they were fearful, but they also went to God when it was just a regular Wednesday or Tuesday. Like, they were just praying often. That was a regular part of what the church did. It was common. And so I want to show you what Paul teaches us in the epistles about prayer. The Apostle Paul, he was one of these guys we saw in the book of Acts who prayed often. We saw 2 weeks ago a couple of examples of that. He was praying for the brand new believers and the elders of the churches that he went and set up. Can you imagine being there and leaving them all to themselves and knowing they're in a hostile culture and saying, okay, you're brand new Christians, here's the church, here's some elders, go. What do? You pray. That's your only hope there. He prayed when he was in prison and being tortured. And he prayed when he was saying goodbye to loved ones, the elders of the church of Ephesus that met together. So he was constantly in prayer. But one of the things we missed when we looked at Paul's praying is that the first thing that we find Paul doing immediately after his Damascus Road experience, right? He's amazingly converted on the road to Damascus. He goes into the city. We're told that he's there for 3 days and he doesn't eat or drink anything. He's in the house. And chapter 9, verse 11 of the book of Acts says, "The Lord said unto him," to Ananias, "Arise and go to the street, which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he prays." So what is Paul doing? I don't know if that meant Paul was praying for 3 days, probably not praying steadily for 3 days. I don't know if it meant that he just happened to be praying at that moment. I don't think that's the case. I think what is trying to come across there that Luke is telling us is that Paul is now praying to the Savior. He's praying to his God for real. This is this authentic prayer that Paul has. And so the way that God told Ananias, hey, Saul is a believer now, is Saul is praying now. I think that's interesting. That's what Paul is doing, or Saul is doing, immediately after he's saved, and that's how he's identified. Paul wrote 13 or 14, depending on the book of Hebrews, letters that are now found in our New Testament. And as one might expect, if prayer is this important, there's a lot in his letters about the subject of prayer. And so I want to look at a couple lessons we get from Paul's epistles, and we'll kind of group some verses together. Because what Paul is doing, right, he's writing letters to a lot of different churches that are in different places, but in a lot of those letters, he's repeating the same things to those churches because they all need to hear this. And so, the first thing that we notice in the epistles that's abundantly clear is that the church was to pray regularly. There's so many words that I thought of using there. I thought the church should be praying continuously, or constantly, or often, or repeatedly, or consistently, or frequently, or incessantly. There's so many ideas, but I think the idea of just regularity, that it's not just like this, habit. It's not just this thing that we have to do, but it's something that we are regularly choosing to be a part of. That's just a part of our everyday life. It's common. It's the normal thing for the church to do, to pray. And we see that so clearly. In the book of Romans, Paul writes chapter 12. He gets to chapter 12. He's already explained the gospel. He's already explained how to be saved. And chapter 12 begins how to live out your faith. This is the Christian life. And so he says in verse 1, you are to live your life as a sacrifice that is acceptable to God. Okay? I talked to Spencer about this week. I said, Spencer, would you die for Christ? He says, yes, of course. Okay? Because we'd all say yes. I said, then don't you think we should be living for him? It's so much harder. And he said that. He said, well, that's a lot harder. Right? But it really is a lot more difficult to live a life of sacrifice to Christ because it requires us to lay down our desires, our flesh, to kill our passions constantly rather than just making that one-time decision, right? Which is a big decision, hard decision, but it's over. My flesh is back every single morning, wanting to sleep in, wanting to do all the things my flesh wants to do. You don't need to know all about that because that's me. But he says, live out your faith. He says, live a life that is a life of sacrifice to God. That's your reasonable service. So how do we do that? He said, well, don't be like the world. Okay, you can't be the same as them now. You have to pursue and to do the will of God. Okay, so what's the will of God? How do I do that? And then he continues with explaining the church, what the church is. Verse 5 says, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and every one members one of another. Okay, so how do we live a life of sacrifice? How do we do the will of God? It comes down to you live a life of community within the church. Use your gifts to build one another up. Love each other. Pursue holiness and godly character. Serve the Lord. Okay, all those things are found in the next few verses. And then in verse 12, he says, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. Okay, constantly in prayer, regularly in prayer, persevering in prayer. That's what we're supposed to be doing as we live out this Christian life. And the more I thought about that statement, I thought, how in the world are these people going to do any of the things that Paul just said to do if they're not doing that thing? How do any of us rejoice in hope and be patient in tribulation if we're not going to God in prayer? How do we love each other the way we're supposed to if we're not constantly going to God in prayer? And so it's a short command there in a section that is completely packed, but I think it's so important. Constantly being in prayer. Paul's expectation is that we'll use our gifts, we'll love each other, we'll pursue holiness, we'll serve the Lord, we'll rejoice in hope, we'll be patient and faithful when trials come, but we'll do all of those things because we are persistent in our prayer lives. There is no substitution to continual devoted prayer. When you take prayer out of the equation, everything falls apart, right? Like, I think as soon as you take a prayer life out of, prayer out of your life, and so you're living a life and you're doing all the same things, all the same actions, all the same behaviors, but you've removed prayer out of that life. What have you just done? You just removed your ability to talk to God, your communication with God. Yes, you can still hear from God in the Word, but I would imagine that will become dull pretty quickly if you're not in a communication relationship with God. As soon as you remove prayer out of the equation, it just becomes this facade, almost immediately. It becomes this thing that we're just, actions that we're doing. it has to be built on a relationship.
It's major nourishment. You shrivel up, and it's nourishment. You have to have it.
Right. I mean, if prayer is what some of these guys in the past have said, if prayer is like breathing, or like water, or like food, if those analogies are at all true, how long can you go without those things before your life truly suffers? Not long. And I would submit that I think prayer is very similar in the Christian life. And I feel like you probably know what I'm talking about, because I'm guessing you've had times in your life like I have where prayer is really difficult and maybe you don't pray like you should, or you don't pray at all for a little while, right? Or maybe that the prayers that you're doing are kind of the ones that your family expects you to do and that your church people expect you to do, but it's not really like this thing that's going on by yourself ever. If you've ever experienced that you know that all of a sudden everything else feels just a little hollow, right? Like there's not the life there, okay? So we have to recognize the importance of prayer as we attempt to live out the Christian life.
It's a direct communication with the Lord.
Yes, it absolutely is, right? I mean, what a gift that we have the ability now, because of Christ's death, to go straight to the throne of God. That's what he made possible.
I know that's 3 in 1, but Jesus, Christians will pray to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Jesus said, "Our Father." Mm-hmm. Now, do we pray to Jesus, or are we going to pray to our Father?
Yeah, so I think that Jesus told us to pray to the Father.
Yes, but so many Christians say in the name of Jesus. But I know there's 3 in 1. Mm-hmm. But he said, "Pray to our Father."
Mm-hmm. So I think
he was on the cross. He said, "Father, forgive them; they don't know what they do."
Yep. Yeah. So I think that the most and like this is one of those the Trinity, 3 in 1. So I don't know that I'd like tell someone, well, you prayed to Jesus, you recognize Jesus and not the Father when you started, and so you're in trouble. I think that God is gracious. He understands. He knows that we're talking to him. However, when we're praying, most commonly, I think we pray to the Father, and we say, "In Jesus' name," recognizing that it's through Jesus that we go to the Father. So we're praying these things to the Father in the name of Christ.
Through the Spirit.
Through the Spirit, through the power of the Spirit, right? Because the Spirit goes on our behalf, making groanings and earnings that cannot be heard.
When you say Father, it identifies you in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how we should start our prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Father.
Yeah.
A son-daughter relationship.
Yep.
And that makes it so personal.
It does.
Yeah,
it just, you begin reminding yourself of the intimacy that shouldn't be there between a God like him and people like us, that he's made possible. Okay.
Before I came to love the Father, I came to love Jesus first,
mm-hmm.
because he saved me from my sins. So
mm-hmm.
knowing and loving Jesus took me to the Father.
Yep.
And that's how he said he would come to reveal his
yep.
Father. So he's very important too.
Right.
Both
absolutely.
Yeah.
If you know Christ, you know the Father. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. But that's a good question, Ken. Good thought. Okay, so let's just move on a couple more verses then, just to make this point abundantly clear that the church should be praying regularly. In 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing. That's pretty obvious. That's pretty straightforward. The word for without ceasing doesn't mean non-stop. What it means is constantly reoccurring. So pray without ceasing. In other words, pray in a way where your prayers end and then they're going to reoccur constantly, regularly, often. Pray without ceasing. Ephesians 6:18, pray always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. Okay, so Paul says to the church of Ephesus, pray always, okay, with all supplication, with all prayer and supplication. 1 Timothy 2:1, I therefore, that first of all, supplications and prayers and intercessions and giving of thanks be made for all men. Okay, first, I want to, Timothy, that you need to be praying. You need to be praying and giving thanks and for all men. Colossians 4:2, continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. So you get the idea that when Paul writes these letters, one of the things he wants to say to all these churches and to Timothy, he wants them to understand they need to be praying regularly. Ian Bound said, how instant, strenuous, persistent, and pathetic was Paul's urgency of prayer upon those to whom he wrote and spoke. When you look at the letters, you see that prayer, Paul was just pushing them toward it constantly. Secondly, we see in Paul's letters is that the church would be granted God's help when they prayed. In other words, we see very clearly that Paul is pushing them toward prayer because he knows that God answers prayer. That they will receive the help that they need, but they will receive it when they pray. First, we see in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, they will receive emotional and mental health. Be careful for nothing. I think that these verses, probably more than most, are incredibly important in our society today. Because we live in a society where anxiety, where this constant being pulled and not feeling good enough and not knowing how to do it and being kind of almost overcome with anxiety, it's so common. I mean, if we were to take a poll in this room and find out how many people have struggled with anxiety, I bet it'd be more than 50%. So, be careful for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Caitlin?
I just caught this as kind of a mind-blowing thing because it's saying let your request be known and the peace of God will keep your heart and mind through Christ Jesus. That doesn't mean that he's going to fix your request or even answer it directly. The prayer itself is supposed to give you the peace.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. You go to God and you pray, and it's not, hey, you've got this problem, but don't worry about the problem. If you pray, God will fix the problem. That isn't what the verse says, right? What the verse says is, don't worry about, don't be so consumed with this issue. Instead, give it to God in prayer. And then know that he's the sovereign Lord of the universe who will take care of it. I mean, that
with thanksgiving.
With thanksgiving. So whatever he does is good and right, and whatever he's doing is good and right. It is a hard place to get to, but when you can pray prayers like that, they really they change you, right? All of a sudden, your hearts and your minds are kept.
The medical profession realizes that too. Counselors and psychiatrists, they want you to communicate to them. They want you to talk. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you have a problem, when you share it with someone, it lifts the burden.
Yeah.
And I think they're taking this from what God says in this verse.
Yeah.
If you communicate with God, it sometimes just loosens us from holding everything inside.
Yeah, that's true. That counselors do want people to talk. I think, though, like when you consider the futility of sitting on a couch and telling a counselor all your problems and what they're able to do to fix them compared to being able to talk to the God of the universe about your problems and know that he works all things for good to them that love him and are called according to his purpose. I think there's a huge difference, right? So like you get this sense of relief from being able to tell a human being about your problems. How much more when we can give those problems to God and know he's in control?
My friend Colleen was saying when we were talking about they weren't sure what the outcome was going to be with Colette, she said, when I go to God, I don't go saying, I go with my request, but the comfort that I find is no matter how he answers that request, he is faithful, and that's what we're banking everything on. So I just thought, that's right, he's faithful. And that's a beautiful thing, you know.
Yep.
And that's why we go to him, not because we want something to turn out a certain way, which we do, but we can trust that he's faithful.
Yeah, and I mean that is faith, right? Faith is at the center of almost everything that probably everything that we're commanded to do as Christians. And when we have the right faith in God that he is good, that his way is good, then that prayer is so comforting because you know that he is good. Good. All right. So be careful for nothing. I hope I solved all of your anxiety issues this morning. Come on, Bernie. It's got to be helpful. Second thing that we find that God's help was given to the church when they prayed, that they received courage and boldness. Now, this is an interesting thing because before you pray a prayer for courage and boldness, you have to want to be courageous and bold, right? And so I think maybe sometimes we're like content to be scared and unwilling to share the gospel. And because of that, we don't want to pray a prayer like this. But that shouldn't be the case, right? Our desire should be to share the glory of Christ with our neighbor, with our family, with our coworkers, with our loved ones, with people we go to school with everybody. We should have a desire for them to know and love Christ like we do. And so we find that if you want to do that, you're going to find the courage and boldness that you require by going to God in prayer. Colossians chapter 4, verse 2 says, "Continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving, withal also praying for us, that God would open unto us a door of utterance to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in bonds, that I may make it manifest as I ought to speak." So that prayer is, pray that God gives us an opportunity to share the gospel so that I can speak as I ought to speak. Paul's asking the Colossian church to pray for him. And that is a little bit crazy because Paul has only been given opportunities to speak. Everywhere he goes, he's preaching the gospel. But maybe this is part of Paul's secret. Maybe part of the reason that he was given so many opportunities to preach the gospel was because he was constantly asking for people to pray for him. It's hard enough for me to ask God myself for an opportunity, let alone to go to you and say, hey, brother, would you mind praying for me that I would have more opportunities to share the gospel? We don't actually pray for that for each other, do we? Not very often.
And the problem with praying that prayer is then opportunities arise.
They do, right? And that's the problem. We might not want courage and boldness. We might want to just skip this altogether. We shouldn't, though, right? And so, but the great part about it is that when we're willing to be obedient, okay, recognizing that we don't have the power and that we're scared and that we have all these difficulties that go along with it, we're willing to be obedient and to share the gospel. He says, come and pray to me and I'll give you the courage and boldness you need, right? I'll give you the power. That's what he does. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints, and for me, that utterance may be given to me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am ambassador in bonds, that therein I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Pray that I'm just a little bit more bold. Paul, how could you possibly be any more bold? And that's the secret to his boldness. He's always having people pray for him that he's bold. Yes. Effie?
For Paul to admonish people to do that, because that's exactly what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He got saved. He went into Arabia, stayed there for 3 years, didn't confer with flesh and blood. He got everything direct from the throne of God. That's where the Old Testament became alive in his heart. And therefore, his whole ministry was through 3 years of prayer and not getting anything from man.
Yep.
You know, so, and if we do that, you know, depend on our relationship with God and go to him and say, Lord, I know your word is in here, but unless you bring it to me and bring it alive in me, then it's just words. It's just my intellect. My intellect is no good when it comes to preaching the gospel. It is your word, and it has to be alive through you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think maybe that's where J.C. Ryle and Martin Lloyd-Jones have something, where they're understanding that even the reading and the studying of God's word isn't really helpful unless you have the Spirit of God illuminating your heart and your mind to see what's written. And so, yeah, we need prayer in all of these areas. And I think that the struggle we have in so many of the spiritual disciplines might partially be a result of the lack of prayer kind of pushing us on in all of those areas.
Yeah, you're talking about prayer in the church. I think what we forget sometimes is, there's that saying that it's held together on a razor's edge. The truth is, a unified church, a church that's going in the right direction, without prayer, it doesn't happen.
No, absolutely.
There's too many factors that destroy churches.
Yep.
We have to be a people of prayer.
Yep.
There's just no other way around it.
Prayer brings people together in the common mission. And I think it's easier to fight with people and about silly things than it is to go to God with those people about those silly things. All of a sudden you get on your knees and you realize what's most important, and you can be unified in the important things and then hopefully work out the silly things because they're actually not important. Andrew?
What does really help me kind of get an understanding of what I'm doing when I don't pray is that prayerlessness is your declaration of independence from God. When you're not in prayer, you're essentially saying, I'm my own little king here.
Yeah.
And then that's going to affect how you do life in all of that. Right?
Yeah.
Your wife, your husband, kids, brothers and sisters in Christ, everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. So, prayer will allow us to be courageous and bold. And the final thing we see as we see how God answers their prayers is this, that he brings sinners to their salvation because of prayer. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1. I don't know, did anybody see this? That the President Trump showed up at David Platt's church kind of unexpectedly and just like, hey, like he got a call right before the service started. The president's on his way to your church. He's going to be in the service today. And so Platt had to make kind of a last minute decision. He chose to have the president up on the stage and then prayed for him. And yes, now there was a lot of controversy within Christendom because a lot of people saw that as him promoting the President Trump, that because he prayed for him, he must be for him. And so there's been a lot of controversy about whether or not he should have done that. I think he's explained himself well, and I think that like he began before he prayed with these verses, and I think that this is the way to go. And so listen to what this says. It says that I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications and prayers and intercessions and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who will have all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And verse 8 says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. So the desire there is to see all men, all different kinds of men and women from all different walks of life be saved, including kings and those in authority. And for Paul writing this to Timothy, the people in authority, the kings he's speaking about, are very anti-Christian. It's some of these kings that will put Paul to death. Okay? And so he's not writing in a circumstance where it's like, yeah, pray for your king. He loves the Lord too. It's pray for your king. He's trying to kill Christians. But he needs to be saved. All men need to be saved. And so there's this command to pray because Paul understood that God would work in people's hearts and lives because other men and women would get on their hands and knees and pray. And I think that there does become a time in relationships with other people where you've shared the gospel with them. There's not a whole lot more you can tell them. That at that point, you just begin to pray for them. And you keep praying for them. And it might be years and years. One of the things that I'm still thankful for, that my family went to a kids club at Harvesters Baptist Church when I was like 8 years old. Maybe 7 years old was the first time we went. It was just a neighbor that invited us. We went out and we ended up continuing to go. And then for about between age 11 and 16, I didn't go. I quit going because I had hockey on Monday nights, and I had very little to do with the church. And my sisters continued to go to the program. My mom did, but our family was pretty disconnected from the church. But from the time that we went when I was 7 years old to the time that I finally came to know Christ at age 16, they prayed for us. The church prayed for us. That's a long time to pray for a family. And our family didn't start attending to the church until I was 16. And so that's a lot of work and a lot of time on their knees, but that's the power of prayer. And it results in the salvation of sinners because God works through people. He works in hearts and lives as people pray. The last thing that I think we see, and there's so many lessons that we could, but I'm trying to pull it quickly. Paul's main lessons on prayer. And I think the last one we see is that leaders in the church must model prayer. Leaders in the church must model prayer. And the question then is, which leaders? Okay. The elders, clearly. But as I thought about this, I thought, there's not, when we look at what Paul did, and the example that Paul set, there's not a lot of people, even in this room, that aren't leading somebody in some way. You're not trying to disciple somebody, whether it's your kids or somebody else in this church or somebody who's struggling. A lot of us are in positions of leadership because, I mean, if we're honest, this room represents a large portion of what we call the core of the church, the people that are really serious about their faith in this church, right? And if that's the case, then there's the people in this room represent those who are trying to disciple, to bring along, to lead others in their walk with Christ. And the greatest way we can do this, especially if prayer is this important, is to not just teach them they should pray, but show them how to pray. And one of the things that shocked me as I looked at Paul's teaching on prayer is that he spends more verses praying for the people he's writing to within the letter than he does telling them to pray. So he models prayer more than he teaches about it. And that's quite often. He didn't leave them guessing how they were to pray or what they should pray for, because he showed them what a godly prayer looks like. We won't have time for them all. We will have time for one. And so let's look at Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14 to 19. Here's one example of how Paul tells these churches that he's praying for them, and this, I think, should direct how we can pray for other believers effectively. I think if we were to look at this prayer, we'd say, this is absolutely a prayer that we should model for other believers that we know. He says, for this cause, verse 14, chapter 3, for this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might by his Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and the length and the depth and the height, and to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge, that you might be filled with all the fullness of God. That's Paul's prayer for the church of Ephesus. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to put such an eloquent prayer together when I go before God for you. But wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if we would go before God and say, God, I want this person to know how much you love them. I want them to understand what you've done for them and to grow closer to you. I want them to walk with you. God, strengthen them, give them power, give them boldness, give them courage, help them to, if we would pray for each other like that, because that's his prayer. And you know what prayer we don't find very often? And I know we've said this many times, but the prayer we don't find very often is the prayer to change a circumstance. It's usually, Paul's prayers are almost always prayers to help people grow, to help them have the strength and the grace and the comfort or whatever it is that they need. And so he models what good prayers look like, how we can pray for each other. And so I would say to you that I think that prayer should be a very regular thing happening within the church. I think that we see very clearly that God answers prayers, and that we must model prayers for others if we are ever going to expect them to pray, to see them grow in this area. They're leaving because they don't like prayer. Kidding. They're going to pray. Yeah. So I've left a list for you of some of the other prayers that Paul prayed that are some of my favorites. And so if you want to check those out on your own, you have 9 other, or more than 9, but at least 9 other prayers to look at there. Next week, we'll close this talk on prayer, and so I kind of want to wrap it all up, review what we've learned, and then hopefully say, where do we go from here as a church?